Thank you very much. Well, it's a delight to be here. I want to thank the City Bible Forum for inviting me to participate in this important dialogue. And I want to thank Professor Krauss for making it so interesting. Thank you as well to you for all coming tonight to discuss these important issues with us. On April 8, 1966, the American news weekly Time carried a remarkable cover story. Is God dead? And the story described the movement among American theologians at that time to proclaim the death of God. However, to paraphrase Mark Twain, it seems that the rumors of God's death were greatly exaggerated. For at the same time that the theologians were writing God's obituary, a new generation of young philosophers and scientists was rediscovering his vitality. Just a few years after its famous Death of God issue, Time carried a similar cover story, only this time the question read, is God coming back to life? And that's how it that's how it must have seemed to those theological morticians of the 1960s. During the 70s and 80s, interest in the intersection of philosophy, science, and theology continued to grow. In 1991, at a conference on the history and philosophy of thermodynamics, the eminent British physicist P.T. Landsberg began with these words: "To talk about the implications of science for theology at a scientific meeting seems to break a taboo. But those who think so are out of date. During the last 15 years, this taboo has been removed. And in talking about the interaction of science and theology, I am actually moving with a tide which is threatening to wash us away in a flood of publications." Over the last quarter century and on into the 21st, a flourishing dialogue between science and theology has been going on in Europe and North America. Numerous societies for promoting this dialogue, like the European Society for the Study of Science and Theology, the Science and Religion Forum, the Center for Theology and Natural Science, and so forth, have sprung up. Not only are there professional journals devoted to the dialogue between science and theology, such as Zygon and Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, but more significantly, secular journals like Nature and the British Journal for the Philosophy of Science also carry articles on the mutual implications of science and theology. God has even found his way into the pages of astrophysics and space science. The dialogue between science and theology has become so significant in our day that both Cambridge University and Oxford University have established chairs in science and theology. I share all this to illustrate a point. Folks who think that science has somehow buried God are simply out of date and out of touch. Science and theology have discovered that they have important mutual interests and important contributions to make to each other. And those who don't like it can choose not to participate in the dialogue, but that's not going to shut down the dialogue or show it to be meaningless. Now, when Dr. Krauss says that science has buried God, he does not mean that science has shown that God does not exist. Rather, he means that God is unnecessary. But unnecessary for what? God is necessary for forgiveness of sins, for salvation, for eternal life. Rather, what Dr. Krauss means is that God is unnecessary for doing science. But in so saying, he is criticizing a very naive concept of God known as the God of the gaps, where God is used to plug up the gaps in scientific knowledge. No one on the contemporary dialogue is advocating a God of the gaps. Dr. Krauss is attacking a straw man. The relationship between science and theology is much more nuanced than a naive God of the gaps. I can think of at least 6 ways in which science and theology are relevant to each other. I have time to talk about only 3. 1, theology furnishes the conceptual framework in which science can flourish. Science is not something that is natural to mankind. As Lauren Isley has emphasized, science is an invented cultural institution which requires a unique soil in which to flourish. Modern science did not arise in the Orient or in Africa, but in Western civilization. Why is this so? It is due to the unique contribution of the Christian faith to Western culture. As Isley states, it is the Christian world which finally gave birth in a clear, articulate fashion to the experimental method of science itself. In contrast to Eastern religions and animistic religions, Christianity does not view the world as divine or as indwelt by spirits, but rather as the natural product of a transcendent creator who designed and brought it into being. Thus, the world is a rational place which is open to exploration and discovery. The whole scientific enterprise is based on certain assumptions which cannot be proved scientifically, but which are part and parcel of a Christian worldview. For example, the laws of logic, the orderly structure of the physical world, the viability or reliability of our cognitive faculties in knowing the world, the validity of inductive reasoning, and the objectivity of the moral values used in science. I want to emphasize that science could not even exist without these assumptions, and yet these assumptions cannot be proved scientifically. They are philosophical assumptions, which are, interestingly, part and parcel of a Christian worldview. Thus, theology is relevant to science in that it can furnish a conceptual framework in which science can exist. More than that, the Christian religion historically did furnish the conceptual framework in which modern science was born and nurtured. 2, science can verify as well as falsify theological claims. When religions make claims about the natural world, they intersect the domain of science and are, in effect, making predictions, which scientific investigation can either verify or falsify. Let me give some examples of each. First, examples of falsification. Some examples are obvious. The views of ancient Greek and Indian religions that the world rested on the shoulders of Atlas or the back of a great turtle were easily falsified. But more subtle examples are available too. Take the claim of many Eastern religions like Hinduism and Taoism that the world is divine and therefore eternal. The discovery during the 20th century of the expansion of the universe reveals that far from being eternal, the universe came into existence at a point in the finite past before which literally nothing existed. Stephen Hawking writes, "Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. But if the universe came into being at the Big Bang, then it is temporally finite and contingent in its existence, and therefore neither eternal nor divine as pantheistic religions had claimed." On the other hand, science can also verify religious claims. Let me give 2 examples. First, one of the principal doctrines of the Judeo-Christian faith is that God created the universe out of nothing a finite time ago. This teaching was repudiated by both ancient Greek philosophy and modern materialism. Then in 1929, with the discovery of the Big Bang, this doctrine was dramatically verified. Physicists John Barrow and Frank Tipler, speaking of the beginning of the universe, explain, at this singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally nothing existed prior to the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo. This is not only the case for the standard Big Bang model, but for other models as well. In 2003, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion throughout its history cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. Even if our universe is but a tiny part of a greater so-called multiverse composed of many universes, their theorem requires that the multiverse itself must have an absolute beginning. Last year, at a conference in Cambridge celebrating the 70th birthday of Stephen Hawking, Vilenkin delivered a paper entitled, "Did the Universe Have a Beginning?" which surveyed current cosmology with respect to that question. He argued that none of these scenarios can actually be past eternal. He concluded, all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. A second scientific verification of a religious claim is the belief of the great monotheistic faiths that the world is the product of intelligent design. Scientists originally thought that whatever the initial conditions of the universe were, eventually the universe would evolve complex life forms. But during the last 50 years or so, scientists have been stunned by the discovery of how complex and delicate a balance of initial conditions must be given in the Big Bang in order for the universe to permit the origin and evolution of intelligent, interactive life. In various fields, discoveries have repeatedly disclosed that the existence of intelligent life depends upon an incomprehensibly delicate balance of physical quantities and physical constants, such that if any one of these were to be altered by less than a hair's breadth, the life-permitting balance would be destroyed and life would not exist. In fact, the universe appears to have been fine-tuned from the moment of its inception for the production of intelligent life. Given the incomprehensible improbability of the initial conditions necessary for our existence, it is plausible that these are not the result of chance, but of design. Thus, science can falsify or verify claims of theology. 3, science encounters metaphysical problems which theology can help to solve. Science has an insatiable thirst for explanation, but eventually science reaches the limits of its explanatory ability. For example, in explaining why various things in the universe exist, science ultimately confronts the question of why the universe itself exists. Now notice that this need not be a question about the temporal origin of the universe. Even if the universe is beginningless and endless, we may still ask why there is a universe at all. As the naturalist philosopher Derek Parfit says, no question is more sublime than why there is a universe, why there is anything rather than nothing. Here, theology can help. Traditional theists conceive of God as a necessary being whose non-existence is impossible, who is the creator of the contingent world of space and time. Thus, the person who believes in God has the resources to slake science's thirst for ultimate explanation. We can present this reasoning in the form of a simple argument. 1. Every existing thing has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. 2. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. 3. The universe is an existing thing. What follows from these three premises? 4. Therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. In summary, then, we've seen three different ways in which science and theology are relevant to each other. Theology furnishes the conceptual framework in which science can flourish. Science can verify as well as falsify theological claims. And third, science encounters metaphysical problems which theology can help to solve. There are other ways in which science and theology are related as well, but time does not permit a discussion of those now. These are but some of the ways in which science and theology are mutually relevant. And that is why, after all, there is such a flourishing dialogue going on between these two disciplines today.